I want nothing to do with her. Those words came from the Queen of England, not whispered, not hedged, not delivered through a private secretary in carefully measured palace language, spoken directly, forcefully, to her own son, in a private room at Balmoral, with the full weight of a woman who had spent 45 years on the throne and knew exactly what her words meant. She had been pushed to it. Charles had come to her that summer, the summer of 1998, nearly a year after the crash in Paris, and asked finally, plainly, that she end her hostility, that she accept Camilla, that she let the woman he loved into the family, into the official life, into the rooms that the monarchy controlled, and that the monarchy had kept closed to her. The Queen's answer, according to Tom Bower's authorized account in Rebel Prince, was this: she would not condone his adultery. She would not forgive Camilla for not leaving Charles alone to allow his marriage to recover. And then the word she used, a word that nobody who was present that night ever forgot. That wicked woman. Charles left the room and called Camilla. He was tearful. He had his answer. And Camilla, who had been waiting for years for the institution to open its doors, understood in that phone call that the doors were staying shut. But here is what nobody talks about alongside that confrontation. The reason the Queen used those words, the reason her refusal went so far beyond protocol, so far beyond institutional management, into something that felt almost personal, traces back to one woman. Not Camilla, not Charles, Diana. The Queen had watched, for 17 years, from the morning Diana Spencer arrived at the palace gates to the morning the news came in from Paris. Elizabeth had watched what the presence of Camilla Parker Bowles had done to a young woman who had been brought into this family and never properly protected. And when Diana was gone, the Queen did something that nobody in that institution had done while Diana was alive. She took her side. This is that story. It comes from Tom Bower's biography, Rebel Prince, from Angela Levin's authorized biography of Camilla, from Andrew Morton's account of the Queen's relationship with Diana, from the documented public record of every royal event. Camilla was excluded from across an 8-year campaign of institutional Cold War. Where one source says it differently from another, I'll tell you, nothing here is invented. Before we go any further, if this channel has ever given you a version of Diana that felt true, take 1 second and subscribe. This one matters more than most. Let's start where everything starts. Not in 1997. Not in the crash. Earlier. In the years when Elizabeth watched and said nothing. Queen Elizabeth II had known about Camilla Parker Bowles for a long time before she called her a wicked woman. She had known before the wedding. That is now part of the settled record. The bracelet with the entwined initials, commissioned by Charles days before he married Diana, was not a secret to the family in the way it was a secret to Diana. Philip had told Charles, in a conversation Diana later recounted on her private tapes, that if the marriage didn't work out after 5 years, he could return to Camilla. There was a time frame, given in advance, which means the affair was anticipated, built into the family's private calculations, long before it destroyed the marriage. Elizabeth's position, in those early years, was the position she had perfected across 40 years on the throne, managed silence. She did not approve of Charles's adultery. That is documented. She did not condone it, but she also did not stop it, and she did not go to Diana and tell her what she knew. The institution managed. The institution contained. The institution smoothed. Diana felt the silence. She described it on her tapes, the recordings she made secretly for Andrew Morton in 1991 and 1992. She described going to the Queen, sobbing, asking what she should do about the marriage, about Camilla, about the situation that everyone around her had known about for years and managed around her as though she were an inconvenience in her own life. The Queen's answer, as Diana recorded it: "I don't know what you should do. Charles is hopeless." 2 sentences, and then silence. Elizabeth was not cruel. The record does not support cruelty. But she was someone who had built her entire reign on the subordination of feeling to function. The monarchy continued. The family managed. Private pain was not, in her framework, something that the institution was designed to address. She had watched her uncle abdicate for love and seen what it cost. She had made a different choice at 25 years old and held to it for the rest of her life. Diana's pain was real. Elizabeth acknowledged it, and the institution absorbed it and moved on. For 15 years, while Diana was alive, the Queen did not stop what was happening. She watched Camilla's presence widen the distance between Charles and Diana until the marriage was publicly described, in front of 23 million television viewers, as having three people in it. She watched Diana be stripped of her HRH. She watched the divorce finalized. She watched the boys, her grandsons, being raised in the fracture that the arrangement had created. And 6 weeks after Diana died in Paris, Charles threw a 50th birthday party for Camilla at Highgrove, July 18, 1997. 6 weeks before the tunnel, 6 weeks before everything. Charles hosted 80 guests at Highgrove for Camilla's 50th birthday. It was the first joint public appearance the couple had made. The guest list was secret, but what was not secret was who was absent. The Queen did not come. Prince Philip did not come. Princess Margaret did not come. Not one of Charles's siblings appeared. The entire senior royal family stayed away. Biographer Sally Bedell Smith noted the conspicuous absence of any members of the royal family at the event. It was deliberate. It was coordinated. It was the royal family sending a message that Charles either did not receive or chose not to hear. Diana was in Saint-Tropez that day, on the Al Fayed yacht. She would be dead in 43 days. The party went ahead without the family's blessing. Charles and Camilla walked out of Highgrove together, and the cameras captured it, and the public, still raw from the divorce and the Panorama interview, and everything Diana had said on record about the three people in her marriage, did not receive it well. And then, 6 weeks later, the phone rang in the middle of the night. August 31st, 1997. The call came to Balmoral. The royal family was in Scotland for their summer stay. Charles was woken first. He was at Diana's side in Paris by morning, travelling on a royal flight to bring her body home. The Queen remained at Balmoral with William and Harry, a decision that would within days become the most consequential public relations catastrophe the monarchy had faced in living memory. The flags at Buckingham Palace did not go to half-mast. The Queen did not return to London. There was no broadcast, no statement, no visible gesture from the institution toward the grief that was beginning to pour onto the streets outside the palace gates. The flowers were arriving by the ton. The crowds were silent and enormous, and Buckingham Palace was closed and quiet. Christopher Anderson, who spent years researching the period for the day Diana died, described the institutional paralysis behind those walls. Charles, at one point during that terrible week, called Camilla. He told her, "The Queen simply will not budge." She was resisting the pressure to return to London. She was resisting the pressure for a public funeral. She had initially, according to multiple accounts, favoured a small private service organised by the Spencer family. Diana, the argument ran, no longer held a royal title. There was no precedent for anything more. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, just 4 months into office, the man who would stand outside Downing Street and call her the People's Princess in a voice that cracked, urged Charles to pressure his mother to return. The public anger was building into something the institution had not prepared for. Eventually, the Queen came back. She stood outside the palace and looked at the flowers, and on the evening before the funeral, she did something she had not done in 45 years of public service. She went on television, not as a monarch, not in formal address, but as a grandmother, and she spoke personally about the woman she had watched and managed, and not quite reached across 15 years. She said Diana was an exceptional and gifted human being. She said she admired and respected her. She said carefully that she spoke as a grandmother, not as a queen, as a grandmother. It was a small distinction that carried enormous weight, because what Elizabeth was acknowledging, in that broadcast, was something the institution had spent 15 years refusing to acknowledge, that the personal mattered, that the human mattered, that the woman behind the title mattered. Diana had spent her entire life trying to show the palace that. She was gone before they said it back. The funeral was September 6, 1997, Westminster Abbey. 2 billion people watching. Earl Spencer's eulogy, its final sentences directed as much at the institution as at the coffin. The Queen sitting rigid in her pew, while the congregation outside applauded, and the sound rolled into the abbey, and the royals sat in silence. Camilla was not there. She had not been invited, was not considered for an invitation, and by every account accepted that she could not be there. She spent the days after Diana's death at her country house, in seclusion, talking to Charles on the telephone. She knew that her presence at any public gathering would make everything worse. She stayed away, but staying away from the funeral was only the beginning of what Elizabeth required. In the months that followed through the autumn of 1997 and into 1998, it became clear that the Queen's position on Camilla had hardened into something qualitatively different from her previous managed silence. This was not diplomatic distance. This was active exclusion. Biographer Angela Levin, whose authorized biography drew on accounts from those close to the couple, documents the scale of it. Camilla was banned from royal functions. She was not invited to official dinners. She was kept out of the events and ceremonies that formed the public architecture of the institution. Not quietly, deliberately, royal biographer Christopher Wilson put it plainly. The Queen said she would not have that woman in her presence. That was the instruction. And the instruction held. Charles's 50th birthday celebration, in November 1998, more than a year after Diana's death, became the most striking single example of the Queen's position. William and Harry sent handwritten invitations to their grandmother, specifically asking her to come. She refused. Any event where Camilla was present was an event Elizabeth would not attend. Philip declined too. The message was identical. The relationship had not been forgiven, and Camilla's presence in any royal space remained unacceptable. Camilla's name was not even to be spoken in the presence of the Queen Mother. That detail comes from journalist and author Robert Jobson. Not just uninvited. Unmentionable. It was against this backdrop, a year of systematic exclusion, a year of Camilla confined to her house, and the telephone and the understanding that the family she wanted to join had shut its doors, that Charles forced the confrontation at Balmoral. The summer of 1998. A late evening. Bower's account describes Charles approaching his mother to ask, once and for all, that she soften her antagonism. His hope was not that she would embrace Camilla publicly. His hope was more modest than that she would at least not directly forbid the relationship, that she would give it room to exist. The Queen had reportedly had several martinis, and to Charles's surprise, she replied forcefully. She would not condone his adultery. She would not forgive Camilla for not leaving Charles alone to allow his marriage to recover. She had lied to about his relationship with this woman, and she wanted nothing to do with her. That wicked woman. Charles fled the room. He called Camilla, tearful. She received the news of the Queen's position in the way she had been receiving similar news for years, quietly, at a distance, with no way to answer it. Now, why? That's the question this script has been building toward, because Elizabeth had managed far worse crises than a son's difficult relationship. She had navigated abdications and constitutional crises and the deaths of prime ministers. She was not a woman given to moral fury. She was a woman given to institutional management. So, what made this different enough to produce the words "that wicked woman" and a command that she wanted nothing to do with her? The answer, documented across multiple accounts, is Diana. Andrew Morton, who knew the Queen's relationship with Diana better than almost any outside observer, told Fox News in 2023 that the animus between Elizabeth's household and Charles's household over Camilla had been present before Diana died and intensified after. He said the Queen and her advisors, her courtiers, her private secretary, all of them believed Charles should give Camilla up, not because they were Camilla's enemies personally, because they understood what her presence in the marriage had cost, what the public had seen, what had been done to a young woman who had been brought into the family and given no protection from it. Camilla's close friend Lucia Santa Cruz, perhaps the most sympathetic witness to Camilla's situation, said something that captures the Queen's position more precisely than anything else in the record. She said that when Camilla was married to Andrew Parker Bowles and came to Balmoral as his wife, the royal family got on with her marvellously. But when the marriage failed and she was with Prince Charles, she was rejected and got all the blame, which was so unfair. She was right. It was unfair. Camilla was not the only person responsible for the destruction of a marriage, but she was the visible symbol of it. And the Queen, who had been unable or unwilling to protect Diana while Diana was alive, was now doing something she had refused to do before. She was holding the line. Not because the institution required it, though the institution did require it. Not because the public demanded it, though the public did demand it, but because somewhere in the calculation of a woman who had managed this family for 50 years, a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed, and the line had Diana's name on it. The exclusion held for 3 years. 3 years of Camilla confined, uninvited, absent from the official life of the family she was part of in every private sense. The first crack appeared in 2000, a birthday celebration for the exiled King Constantine of Greece at Highgrove. Camilla was present. The Queen was present. They were not at the same table, but they were in the same room, and according to those who witnessed it, that was described as a highly significant public moment, the Queen finally agreeing to end her personal boycott. It had taken 3 years. 3 years since Paris. 3 years since the funeral. 3 years since the doors closed. In 2001, the Queen was seen at the same public event as Charles and Camilla. In 2002, the death of the Queen Mother, who had also refused to have Camilla around, who had made her position clear in her own way, removed another layer of institutional opposition. The softening continued, slowly, in the way that the Queen did most things, gradually, without announcement, communicated through presence rather than statement. By 2005, Elizabeth gave her consent for the marriage. She did not attend the civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall. That absence was noted and debated. Some called it a snub. Some said she found the venue insufficiently dignified. But she attended the blessing at Windsor Castle. She made a toast. She stood beside them in photographs. She had arrived. It had taken 8 years. And in 2022, in her Platinum Jubilee message, she went further than anyone had expected. She said it was her sincere wish that when the time came, Camilla would be known as Queen Consort, not just accepted, endorsed. Publicly, formally, in writing, in a statement timed to outlast her. The woman she had called a wicked woman, the woman she had banned from her presence, the woman she had refused to sit at the same table as for 3 years after Diana's death. That woman was now being placed by Elizabeth's own hand on the path to the crown. Here is the thing that the record almost holds but never quite confirms. The reason Elizabeth's position after Diana's death was so much harder than her position before it. Before the crash, the calculation was institutional. Camilla was damaging to the monarchy. The public would not accept her. Charles needed to manage the situation. The institution required him to exercise discretion. Those were the arguments, and they were practical arguments. After the crash, the calculus changed. Because the public's response to Diana's death, the week of flowers and silence and 2 billion people watching a coffin travel through London streets, told the Queen something she hadn't known the full scale of before. It told her what Diana had meant, not to the institution, not to the family, not to the careful management of the monarchy's image, but to people, ordinary people, the people outside the gates, the people who left flowers until the gates couldn't hold them. Diana had given something to those people, something the palace hadn't engineered and couldn't replicate, and Camilla, in the public mind, was the name attached to its loss. Andrew Morton said, in 2023, the Queen and her advisers felt that Camilla was damaging to the monarchy. There is no question about that. But there was something else underneath that institutional judgment. Something that Elizabeth, a woman who communicated in black and white while Diana had communicated in colour, could not quite put into words. A responsibility, perhaps. For the years of silence while Diana suffered, for the 2 sentences, "I don't know what you should do," "Charles is hopeless," that were all she'd been able to offer when a young woman came to her sobbing and asked to be helped. She couldn't fix that. Nobody could fix that. But she could do what the institution had not done while Diana was alive. She could hold the line. She could make it clear, in the only language she had, the language of presence and absence, invitation and exclusion, which events she attended and which she would not, that what had happened to Diana inside this family was not, in her judgment, something that could simply be moved past. She never said it out loud. That wasn't how Elizabeth worked. She said it in every event she refused to attend, every table she refused to share, every time Charles asked her to soften and she answered with 2 words and a name, that woman. Leave Diana here, not at the end, not in Paris, not in the crash or the tunnel or the flowers outside the gates. Leave her at the beginning of 1981, January, 2 months before the engagement is announced, 6 months before the wedding. A young woman who doesn't yet fully understand what she's walking into, who has seen the bracelet and heard the telephone call and gone to her sister's and been told it's too late to change her mind. She doesn't know, in January 1981, that she is going to spend 15 years asking the institution that is about to absorb her to see her as a person. She doesn't know that the woman who runs that institution, the most powerful woman in the country, the woman whose word on family matters is final in the way that no other word is final, is going to watch what happens to her and say very little for a very long time. She doesn't know that after she is gone, after everything is over, Elizabeth is going to do something she couldn't quite bring herself to do while Diana was alive. She is going to close a door. She is going to say that wicked woman with something in her voice that goes beyond institutional management into something more human and more complicated and harder to name. She is going to hold the line for 8 years. For the girl who came into her family at 20, who sobbed in her private sitting room and was sent away with 2 sentences. Who went in front of 23 million people and said 3 of us in this marriage, which was the truest thing said in public about this family in decades. Who was taken from her boys and her apartment, and her charity work, and the dark wig she wore in Chelsea, and the ironing board in a 1-bedroom flat, taken from all of it in a tunnel in Paris in the middle of the night. Elizabeth couldn't give Diana what Diana had asked for. She couldn't reach across the glass between them. She spoke in black and white. Diana spoke in color, and the gap was too wide to cross while Diana was alive, but she shut the door afterward. That was what she could do, and she did it. That wicked woman, 3 words, spoken in private, that said everything she'd never found a way to say while the person they were protecting was still alive to hear them. Thank you for staying with me through this one. It's one of the harder stories to tell because it's not about a single moment. It's about the long, slow, complicated reckoning of a woman who ran the most managed family in the world, finally running out of management. Elizabeth was not Diana's champion. The record is clear on that. But in the years after Diana died, she became something that almost nobody noticed at the time. She became her witness, in the only language she had, which wasn't color, but it was something.